Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fiercely Spiritual Podcast. I'm your host, Sandra Ray, and today I have Michelle Lagaly with me. Michelle is an intuitive life coach where she helps women to develop their intuitive abilities. Michelle, you're very welcome. I see you gave me the thumbs up, so hopefully I pronounced your name correctly.
I'm so proud of you. That's impressive. You're the first person who's ever said it correctly on the first go.
Oh, wow. So, welcome. I am so glad to have you here. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you because you talk about and teach a topic that's very close to my heart. I love talking about intuition, intuitives, empaths, and I think that sometimes it kind of is a topic that, well, more and more now people are talking about it and embracing their empathic nature. And it's something that we're realizing is a gift, which was probably not always seen that way. But let's start out by explaining what it means to be sensitive, to be intuitive, and how does somebody know if they are?
Wow, great question. Okay, so I think of empaths and sensitives are people who feel more, see more, feel emotions. They could be sensitive to touch, the sun, the lack of sun. They're sensitive to spirit. They're sensitive to animals, the earth, the collective conscious. They're extra sensitive. That's how I define empaths and sensitives. An empath is just a little bit different, where this is, again, my own definition based on my own experience. Empaths try to take on the pain and suffering of other people, animals, planet, and it can cause problems in their own personal lives if they're not aware of that. And that's the difference, I think, between empaths and sensitives. Empaths carry it.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. We'll go into that a little bit deeper. But I'd love to know, did you always know you were an empath or a sensitive, or is it something that you discovered later in life?
No, it was later in life. I didn't have words for it when I was younger. I don't think the word empath, it was not in my world, or it didn't exist yet, or it just didn't exist in my world. And when I look back at my younger self, the way I see it now is I would say to my mom, like she would be talking to somebody and I'd say to my mom, that lady's, the words she said, but how she feels on the inside aren't the same. And my mom would say, what are you talking about? I said, what she's feeling on the inside and the words that came out aren't the same. And my mom would just say, I have no idea what you're talking about. So when I look back, that's my first memory of me picking up on the incongruency in people.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because that's something that I've always, just tuned into. And I always thought everybody saw that or, felt that way.
Yes.
But yeah, it's funny now I realize, oh, people don't actually realize that what people say and what they're actually feeling can be different. And I know I always pick up on it. And sometimes I'll smile to myself because I'll be having a conversation with somebody and you know what the feeling is behind what they're actually thinking and saying. And it's really, really interesting when you start to embrace it and to know, okay, what I'm feeling is different to what they're saying, but that's okay because I'm picking up on another layer of energy, so to speak.
Yes. Amen to all of that. Yes. And I was like you also. I thought everyone did that. And it wasn't until a little bit later when you saw people's confusion that you start, how, again, I don't think it's a conscious thing, but you know what not to talk about anymore to get along with people. And so I think those things eventually get dumbed down or dimmed down in us.
Yeah, and I don't know if you find, what I find is sometimes I'll take on people's personality traits as I'm talking to them. And sometimes I'll be talking to somebody who's maybe feeling a bit awkward or like stumbling over the words, and I'll start stumbling over my words. And it's so funny because I'll like take on, and equally, if I'm talking to somebody who's really confident and really, just like confident in themselves, I'll start acting and feeling that way as well. But what I've realized is I don't have to take on those traits. And I can be myself without having to take on other people's stuff.
That's great. And that's what I call a thriving empath, when someone becomes conscious of that ability and then is stays conscious to when they want to use it and not use it. So.
So how did you come to know yourself to be an empath? Was it through some life lesson, or was it just from learning about your spiritual side? How did you recognize that side of you?
I think it came through me at some point, not really happy with my life. And it started with me listening. I forget who I was listening to. This was before the internet. Like, you had to buy CDs online. and I remember somebody saying, follow your joy, start listening to yourself. What is interesting to you? And it was the first time I had thought of doing something that I was interested in. I was just kind of raised, you become a teacher, you have kids, you get married, whatever. I just was following the plan. And then I started to listen to this. He was a channeler. And then I would start to follow this thing of, okay, well, my choices today are do the dishes, walk the dog, make dinner. And I would just, out of those little things, feel into the one that was the most interesting. And I did that with everything. And it opened me up to learning more what I was interested in. Then I started to go to classes about intuitive development. And that's where I was never good at regular school. I struggled in regular school, but I went to mediumship school. And then I was the top student, which was a brand new experience for me, because I didn't realize the way I was wired was that. And it really wasn't until I was probably 30 something that I was like, oh, this is it. This is who you are. This is why this all makes sense now.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really till later in life.
I can relate, because I remember being in school and being, the kind of daydreamer and not really having that much interest in some of the lessons, and, obviously picking up on everything that was going on around me, more so than what the teacher was saying, and finding that also, I'd be in this world of, imagination, but that's connecting also to the spirit world and our creative side, which at the time I just thought, oh, I'm probably just daydreaming or whatever, but it was connecting to that other side. Did you find that?
Yes, I found that. And many people still tell me this is a cop out, but I really believe it, where I think empaths attach to things through our emotions. And so as a student in school, maybe like history was something I didn't have an emotional connection to. So I could not retain it. It was just, if I didn't have an emotional thing, I couldn't attach to things I didn't have that emotional connection to. So unless the subject was something I could have an emotional connection to, I was diagnosed as like poor retention, poor this. But now that I see as an adult, I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I can only do things I'm passionate about. Sorry, everyone. It's just the way I'm wired.
Yeah. And I think that's why, well, obviously that's why you've ended up teaching intuitives and empaths and helping them. That's your passion. And same with me. I tried the corporate space and, doing the kind of office job. And, there were aspects of it that I loved. But also I knew that it wasn't what I was going to be doing forever. And I think when you listen to your intuition and try and follow that path as you did, just tuning in today, what is like calling to me? What am I feeling that is going to be nurturing to me, to myself, to my soul? And just like little by little, because you don't have to do it in one fell swoop. You take those little baby steps towards what is calling you.
Amen. I totally agree with that. And I don't think it happens, like you said, in a day, although people can have life changes that really pull the rug out from their life and put them on a new path, and that way works too. But I like nudges and whispers. I don't want a 2x4 over the head. So I just listen now and follow the path.
Yeah, exactly. And those little nudges and those whispers, if we're in tune, we can hear them, but it's when we get, as you say, that 2.4 over the head is when we're not listening to those little nudges, and then suddenly we have to make big changes. But I wanted to talk to you about honoring our sensitive side, and what we were saying earlier about embracing our empathic nature and allowing ourselves to use it for our highest and best good rather than it being a burden or holding us back. So how can sensitives honor their sensitive side and take care of themselves and their energy?
Yes, to all that. I have found, for me and others that I help, the best thing is to find a community of like-minded, sensitive souls. And like right before you and I were talking, I was with my group of sensitive souls. And the way we talk, the way we feel, the way we think, we're like sisters. And it's just so nice. We lift each other up. It's just, we expand, and we that's a space where we believe our gifts are awesome. Like we see them and feel them as gifts, whereas the rest of our lives, it's not so much that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sometimes we kind of hide behind the roles that we're in, or the way we're meant to act in society. And
Yes.
that's okay to a certain extent. We don't want to be going around talking to spirit, all the time, or
Yes.
whatever it is we do. But obviously it's beautiful when you can come together with a group and you can just open up and be yourself and not have to hide any of that, and for people to relate and to know that you're on the same wavelength. Yeah, I totally agree. There's nothing better, and it's so nourishing.
Yes. And I've got chills just you talking about that. I've got chills.
Yeah.
Because before I really understood the type of people we are, I would get a book and I would sit at my home when I had time and I would read the book. And that was helpful, but not the way we can grow now. Like it's a different time now. We can find each other. We can get online. You and I found each other. We're going to like, this is the life I want to live now. Like there's so much more available to us today than ever.
Absolutely. And, I think for me, I find both really nourishing. I love sitting down with a book, but I love connecting with other people who are on the same path. And there's sometimes when I love nothing more than sitting with a cup of tea, sitting with a book, and having that time to myself. And at other times, being in that space with other people and, just feeding each other and uplifting each other. And we can do that, as you say. It's available. We don't have to be isolated or feel like we're the only one. And I think for me, certainly when I was younger and I was interested in angels and spirit and intuition and all the spiritual stuff, not many of my friends were into the same thing at the time. So it's lovely to find people who are on that same wavelength. And what I wanted to mention is that, often when we don't realize, because I didn't know I was an empath until I started doing Reiki healing. And it was in a healing where I think somebody was having, I started having symptoms of a cold, and my nose started running. I started feeling a bit achy. And at the end, I said to her, "Do you have a cold by any chance?" And she's like, "Oh, yeah, I started getting one the other day." And as soon as she walked out the room and I cut ties and cleared my energy, all those symptoms went away. And so that was what made me kind of first realize, oh, okay. But there's different levels of empath. Not everybody feels it or has those physical symptoms to that degree. There's different levels. Do you want to just quickly touch on?
We might have to talk about this together. The way you described it is the way I recognize it most. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Physical symptoms, anxiety is the one I'll grab, because honestly, that's the one that I suffered with the most. So I still have that healing work to do within me. So when it's very easy for me to resonate when someone comes in my world with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've noticed with empaths, two things. They're just natural empaths where they're pretty healthy and they're literally just feeling the stuff of other people. But mostly I found empaths who have their own inner work to do and don't see that yet. And their own stuff is being pressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of being mirrored back to them,
Yes.
and they're getting triggered by certain people or events or situations.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and also what you were talking about at the start, where when you're talking to people and you can kind of read into the meaning of what they're feeling behind the words. So I think a lot of people might start out with that and just notice that they're kind of feeling a bit more than what people are saying, or reading into it a bit more. And I thought I was just really good at reading people. I just thought, oh, I'm really good at just knowing somebody's character. And that's how it kind of started off, not realizing that that was part of being an empath. The physical symptoms, picking up on physically within your body, not all empaths do that. That is something that only certain empaths do. Everybody has different layers or different levels.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know if I've really thought about it like you're talking about it. So we should talk about it. So yes, I agree with what you're saying. Some empaths, like you said, take on the characteristics like confidence. Does that make sense? But I don't know. You have to tell me more. I notice more of the way you described it. They'll get the cold. Like I got a toothache the other day and my daughter's tooth fell out around the same time. That stuff that I don't like. I don't need to feel anybody else's. And even though I'm trying to stay conscious to it, that's the layer that I really know about empaths.
Yeah.
What are the other layers? Share them with me.
Yeah, there's like, you touched on it earlier about people who are sensitive to light, sensitive to sound, sensitive like for me, certainly like loud noises. And with two young boys, sometimes I'll have to just go into a room and sit down and try and escape the noise for a while, because I don't want to be constantly telling them, you're not allowed to shout, they have to be able to express themselves. But yeah, bright lights, noises, you were saying earlier, touch, sensitive to touch. So feeling on a deeper level than maybe other people would, or being more sensitive to certain things, and being in crowds, when you're in crowds, being sensitive and picking up on stuff that's going around you. So there's kind of that highly sensitive side to people, and there's empaths, but I don't know if there's like line between the two. I don't know if you can say cut off one and say, okay, that's a highly sensitive person and that's an empath. I think the lines are kind of blurred.
It's a spectrum. And I think I notice, for example, when I'm not feeling good, just I get sick, I become, and I think this is true for all of us, I'm highly sensitive in my mediumship. When I'm low, I'm highly sensitive to anxiety. So I become more sensitive when my own energy's low. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's a spectrum. And then when I'm feeling better and I'm feeling stronger, I might not pick up on my daughter's toothache, or you know what I mean? So it's dynamic. It's not static at all. It's a spectrum.
So do you think that's because when you're feeling low, your boundaries aren't as good? And when you're feeling good, maybe your energy is more protected?
You can say it that way. Yeah, I think that's true. Or stronger. I can hold my own. I look at it like colors. I know I'm a certain color and you're a certain color. And for me, consciously, at the end of this, I'll make sure you get all your color and I'll take my color back, because that's how I keep and I feel like when I'm not feeling well or my energy's low, it is like that. Like I'm not staying conscious of when my color's leaking and when I'm taking on others. So yes, to your question, it's a boundaries thing.
Yeah.
And it comes from when I'm not strong. So yes.
Yeah. And I find the same. If I'm feeling really energized and strong, I can go out into a group or a crowd and hold my energy. Whereas if my energy is depleted, particularly if it's at the end of the day, if I'm feeling tired, if I have to go out and socialize, and even my wording is telling if I have to go out and socialize.
Yeah, I can relate.
But yeah, I might find that I just end up being drained and, just getting home and just like collapsing on the couch and feeling like I'm wiped out. Whereas if my energy is good, I'll be able to hold that energy and not let it be drained. But that also comes with setting boundaries, protecting our energy, doing the work beforehand so that we're going into those situations protected. Are there any ways that you do that, or you could recommend people to protect their energy?
Gosh, this could go deep, so you cut me off. I think one of the things that I did, and I try to help other people with, It's like, get really clear about what you really want for your life. Like, can we move out of our do the things that you're obligated to and you want to, like, I'm obligated to my family, so I'm going to do those tasks. And that's important to me. Do I need to socialize? Or was I conditioned to want that, or not even want it, to do it? So once I really became clear that that's not really for me, and I let that go, I felt better. Now, if I decide like I'm going to go to this family event or a friend's thing because I've consciously said I do want to do this, I might save it for 1 hour. I might say I'll be there for 1 hour. So I'm very stingy with my time now to keep me feeling good. And that's all. That's not me taking a bubble bath and blocking my energy. It's me getting clear about the life I really want to live. What do you
And being
think
clear
about
about your boundaries
that?
and
Yes.
who you want to interact with, and not feeling, because I think a lot of the time we feel we have to go to the social occasion, or we have to turn up, or, what will people think of me if I don't? And, feeling that obligation. And as you say, once we realize, okay, I can decide, and it's not through hurting other people, it's through honoring my own intuition, my own energy, my own feelings. And that's okay, allowing ourselves to do that.
Yes. And I think either the way we were raised, or it's just because we're empaths and we do pick up on the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of others, we have a really bad habit of noticing other people before us and making sure that they are happy or stay okay, or I'm going to behave in a way that keeps this nice and happy. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I want to go into that because I think it's a really important point, because empaths are naturally intuitive. But because we're picking up on everybody else's energy, everybody else's feelings, putting them first, then we're not actually listening to our own intuition. We're listening to the loudness of the energy of all those around us. And it's, I think, really important to begin to distinguish what's theirs and what's ours, and to hone our intuition so that we're not just, giving away all our power, and really staying true to what's right for us. So what do you recommend to begin to take steps towards that?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest problem for empaths. I think it's the number one reason why they want to isolate, is because they're exhausted and they want to not feel everybody else's stuff. But I think a thriving empath is someone who's conscious of how they're wired and puts things in place to change that behavior. And the one thing I'm going to share with you right now, I think is so effective, but it's a simple tool. But if somebody doesn't use it consistently, it's like a muscle. You'll get better and better if you use it. And it's as simple as, when you're with somebody, that you stay conscious. And what I mean by that is, in my mind, I'm going like this. Am I just only in my head? I'm not saying this out loud. I'm just being a regular person with this person. And I'm saying, but in my head, I'm like, is this theirs or mine? Oh, now I'm feeling anxiety. Is this theirs or mine? So the entire time I'm staying aware of whose is whose. Does that make sense?
Mm.
And then the next step, you might not be able to do it in the moment. You might have to go home and like look at this thing. I go like this. Now, if I was going to speak in the way that served me, what would I have said? And if I was going to speak and do and behave in a way that served them, what would I have done? And to start to see the difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a really good way to distinguish.
Yeah. And you might, in the moment, will just act like you always act because we're conditioned to please or whatever. But if you can take a step back when you get home and go, that's interesting. If I would have just held my own and said what I wanted to, I would have said this, and just start to notice the difference. And it's a big wake up call. You'll start to see how habitual that behavior really is.
And I think that habitual nature will probably continue on for a little while. It's like a kind of process of weaning it out.
Yes.
And first of all, as you say, becoming aware, noticing where you're doing it. And then you can start to notice yourself in the middle of doing it. And then you can start to make changes. And then it'll come to a point where eventually you'll either stop doing it straight away, or you won't even begin to do it because you've developed a new habit. But I remember I used to sit in a group of people, and I would be thinking, okay, he's feeling that way. He's feeling a bit anxious today. How can I make him feel better? And another person is feeling good. It's like, okay, they're feeling good, so they're fine. And this other person, they're feeling this way. And I was always trying to fix the other person and like their emotional state. And then I'd take that on. So I'd end up being a mess because, of course, you can't change people and the way they're feeling. You can just, bring your energy, and then that can be contagious in itself. If your energy is high, that can lift others up. So I think maintaining your own energy rather than taking on others and trying to fix them is a much better strategy. And it's always like going within. But I love that strategy of even just sitting back and looking at, okay, how did I react? Was that in my best interest, or was that in their interest? And just kind of starting to begin to question that.
Yeah, it's a really effective tool. And to add on to that piece, I've noticed when I try new things, you know how we're only doing this in our own minds and nobody else knows we're doing it. But I noticed when I started sharing my little techniques with my family, let's say my husband, I would say to him, you know what? I've noticed I care more about whatever pleasing you than telling you what I think. I don't even know if I know what I think. So I'm doing this experiment where I'm going to pause for a second and think about it. So you may see me acting a little strange. Are you cool with that? Whenever I bring my family and friends on board with whatever I'm doing, the change happens so much with more grace and ease. Does that make sense? Instead of me just holding it in my own self and experimenting. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you're explaining that process, because often I will be doing stuff like that, but I won't actually explain it to other people.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a really good point, that if you actually tell people this is what I'm doing, because I even had a situation the other day where I asked my husband a question and he paused for extra long. And I said, are you going to reply? And he was like, no, I'm just thinking about it. And I think sometimes if we explain to people, okay, and even then I said to him, oh, that's okay to think about it, but maybe let me know you're thinking. But yeah, it seems obvious, but actually explaining some of the processes that we might be doing or going through can be really helpful for others to understand us.
It has changed my life more than anything to say to it's always my family and friends, because that's who, or really just family. That's who I spend my most time with. And they love us, and they all we love each other. So we want to make a great environment. And I did, this isn't an intuitive thing, but my husband and we noticed since COVID happened, we would talk to each other once a day. He's at work, I'm at home, and the kids are here. And we were more negative, like, well, so-and-so, whatever. And I said, just in my mind, I thought, I'm going to get on the phone and be positive now. I do not want negative phone calls. And I did it for a few days, and I felt the frustration because he wasn't on board. And then I finally went, I forgot to tell you the new thing I'm doing, and I need you on board. And he's like, I would love to do that. And as soon as I shared the new way we were going to be, he's like, yeah. And then it was the new way. There was no frustration.
Yeah.
And it's just that communication.
Yeah, it was like suddenly overnight you changed.
Yes.
He was like, what's going on? We have this conversation where we unload.
Yes. Yeah. And then it changed easily.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So I think there's so many positives. We've talked about some of maybe the drawbacks of like picking up on other people's energy and managing our own, but there's so many positives being intuitive, being empathic, being sensitive, that we haven't really touched on. And I find for myself, we talked about reading other people or knowing what they're going through. For when I was doing healing work, that helped so much with understanding what a person was going through, and not just understanding, but knowing what they were feeling and feeling it within myself, and being able to say, okay, I know what you're going through and actually know what they're going through. So I think there's a lot of positives to it that I'd love to touch on as well. How have you felt that it's helped you?
Oh boy, I love this question. It's like it's our gift. And when you own the gift, you get on a path to your life purpose. It like it's I don't know. I don't have any good words for this. Like I just feel fulfilled with it now. It's not a curse anymore. I help people every day. I help people discover their own intuitive abilities. I talk about what I'm passionate about every day. I coach people every day. I help people with their emotions. Like I get to do the thing that I thought was a curse at one time or I struggled with is the gift now, and I use it every day to help other people's lives get better. And I could cry talking about it.
And that's come from you owning that and honoring your sensitive side and knowing that it can help others. And for me, I think there's so many empaths out there who are going around feeling all these things, having this sensitivity, and not having a clue that that's what they are, that they're empaths and sensitives, and thinking that it's such a burden when they they just haven't discovered what it actually is. So I love this conversation where we can talk about what it is and help people to notice and to open up to what they're feeling and how they're being.
Yes, amen. I think it's a path we all go through. So there's a level of unconsciousness. You're not aware of who you are and how you're wired. And that'll be a struggle for most. And then you start to wake up to, you hear about like your podcast or you hear someone else talking about like empath, what is this? What? And then you start to identify like, oh, wow, I get that this makes sense. And then they start to learn the tools and like what it can be a gift, and it's that journey of discovery, and then you become the conscious empath. And I think that road is just the best road.
And you mentioned a few times you were talking about thriving empath. So what does that look like to you? What is a thriving empath?
A thriving empath is a sensitive soul who uses those abilities to make their own lives the way they want them. But I think the fulfillment comes from using those gifts to heal and help others.
And I think a lot of us, whether we're empaths or not, um, are feel so much more fulfilled when we're helping others and when we're serving others. And I think sometimes we talk about being of service and serving others in a way that it feels like, oh, I have to do it, or it's a burden, or this is something like charity work that I have to do, but it's not like that at all. When you're using your gifts to serve others, doing what you love, it's just such a blessing because every day you're being in your power, you're helping others, you're enjoying what you're doing. And for me, the serving part is almost not even an awareness, because it's just like this flow of energy between me and my members or clients or whoever I'm working with. Do you find that?
I do find that. What I did find is I was unconscious at the time. I wasn't aware of like this equal energy exchange. So I was doing a lot of work like, oh, you don't have to pay me, that's okay. And I felt that drain. And it wasn't until I understood about my value and the worth and like these gifts have value to them, and I started to charge for my services, and that was wobbly at first, and I learned a lot about myself. Then I could feel like the power, the excitement of, wow, this is what I do for a living. This is, wow, like it felt different. And then I could feel the drain go down after having some years of experience. I felt that drain again. And then I started to charge more. And then it felt good again. So there's something with this energy exchange. It doesn't have to be money. Maybe it could be something else. But like that was a really key learning for me with this work.
Absolutely. And I think I've worked with so many healers and people who are in the space who start out not charging for their work, and then they kind of get to a point where they're like, well, how can I start charging when, my friends and family and everybody is expecting me just to give away the thing that I'm offering? And it's almost chronic in, you'd never expect to go to an accountant or a solicitor or somebody else offering a service and not pay them. Maybe if it's a family member or something like that.
Oh,
But there's very few times where you will have this exchange, this service offered, and not have to give something back. And I know that's one of the key principles with Reiki. When you start out, there always has to be an energy exchange. And as you say, it doesn't have to be money, but there has to be some sort of exchange, even if it's like offering a healing for a healing or something like that.
yes.
But it's so important. And that's what we were talking about a minute ago about setting boundaries. I think that's a really important part of it, and not just giving your energy away, because that's how people end up feeling, just frazzled, because they've just let all their energy flow out and not received.
Amen to all. Yes. Yes to that. And there's at least for me and the women I help, there's some thing, I don't have it dialed in yet, about our own value and worth in the world that gets tied into that I do not see it show up for women or myself until I start to charge. Then a big Pandora's box of weird stuff of I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough stuff came up. It was fine when I was doing it for free, but then I stepped into being the professional with it, and a lot of weird stuff. So I was so excited because I'm like, I've got more healing to do. And then I see it with the women I help now too. I'm like, okay, ladies, we're going to start charging. And, there's like, I'm not ready. Oh, so yeah, there's something really interesting, and it is chronic in the healer, helper, light worker industry. Like, it's chronic that we are not charging for our services.
Mm. And what I find interesting as well is often then people will expect to have that service for free, because they're like, oh, but like, you guys do not just like give this stuff away.
Yes.
But I also find that the people who do invest in themselves, they get so much more from it, because they have invested in the service or whatever it is, or the membership of the group or the course, and they've committed to doing the work. And they said, I'm committed to this. I'm going to pay for this. This is showing my commitment. And now I'm going to follow through and do the work. Whereas when you don't have that commitment, then they don't necessarily follow through and do the work. That's what I've found.
Me too. And I thought about this too. I've noticed that in my own world. And maybe it is part of that energy exchange where they actually can't receive the level that they could because they haven't given. Do you know what I mean? I've always wondered, like, is that why? Is that why the more someone pays, the more the benefit they get, because the give, then they can receive more? And I don't know the real answer, but I've always been fascinated with that. And I have found that to be true.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the breath. If you want to breathe deeper, you have to breathe out more. You have to empty your lungs more and then breathe back in more. So it's, again, that exchange.
Yeah, I love that. What a great metaphor. That's perfect.
So when people start working with their gifts as an empath, how can they help others if they're not in this healer space, or, they may be just working in an office job or a corporate, or, it might be some other service-based industry. How can they begin to help others?
Oh, good question. The question is, how can someone begin to help others with their gifts? Is that the question?
Yeah.
First, I would ask, like, is this something you want to do? So if somebody's a yes on that, then, oh my gosh, what would I say? I think I would say find a mentor, like find a guide. I don't have one thing that I'm like, go try this cool thing. I don't think I have that. Find a mentor, find a guide, find a group, find something that like that you can get with and start talking and communicating with those people. Like, I think that's going to be my first recommendation. Find a group of like-minded people.
Yeah, that's really good. And I often find as well that sometimes the people that I work with, I find they're already maybe doing some channeling work, or they're already maybe learning about tarot cards or learning about angels and doing angel readings, but they're not sharing it with the world. And I find what I always recommend is to start just sharing, even if it's scary, even if they're not ready, even if they feel, oh, you know what, I'm just doing this as a side thing. Just to begin to start sharing the messages or the things that are coming through, because often the messages aren't just for ourselves, they're to help somebody else, and that can help somebody really in profound ways that we don't even realize.
I love that. I think that's a great tip.
So when people want to contact you, if they want to get in touch with you, where is the best place to go? Because I love everything that you've talked about. So how can they learn more from you?
You could just, somebody could go to my website, michellelagaly.com. There's actually a thing on there that says top 10 signs you're an empath sensitive, right? When you go to michellelagaly.com, that they might like that. And that's probably the best way to find out about me. I also have an Empaths and Sensitives Facebook group online. Those are probably the two easiest ways.
Brilliant. And it's been such a lovely conversation. I love that we've opened up this conversation and been able to talk about this, because I know the listeners will so resonate on so many levels. So thank you for being open to sharing. And I'll put a link in the show notes as well if people want to go find you.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me. Again, this was like my first podcast, so I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you.
Such a pleasure. It's been so lovely chatting with you. So thank you everybody for listening. We will be back next week for another episode of the Fiercely Spiritual podcast, and we'll see you then. Bye bye.